Good morning. We're going to continue our reading of the BFG, and here we are with Chapter 5, and Chapter 5 is actually titled the BFG. So we only have 5 pages to read today, but we are to the point where Sophie is in the same place as the BFG. He took her to his little world and to his secret hideout. And we are going to learn some things about the BFG, and we are going to start to really figure out what he's like, what his personality is like, and we're going to have a conversation with him. So as Sophie and the BFG have a conversation, I want you to think about the following question. How does the BFG describe himself? So I want you to think about that. How does the BFG describe himself? It might be a little different than how Sophie described him in the very beginning. All right, here we go. Chapter 5. The giant picked up the trembling Sophie with one hand and carried her across the cave and put her on the table. Before I keep reading, as I read, you'll notice I'm saying some words a little weird, a little funny. That's not because I'm not reading them right. It's because they have some different, purposefully have some different spellings in here to make it seem like the giant or whoever's talking doesn't say the words right, or they make up words of their own. So just keep that in mind. I might say some really weird words as I read. It's because there are some made up words in here. Now he is really going to eat me, Sophie thought. The giant sat down and stared hard at Sophie. He had truly enormous ears. Each one was as big as the wheel of a truck and seemed to be able to move. He seemed to be able to move them inwards and outwards from his head as he wished. "I is hungry," the giant boomed. He grinned, showing massive square teeth. The teeth were very white and very square, and they sat in his mouth like huge slices of white bread. Please don't eat me," Sophie stammered. The giant let out a bellow of laughter. "Just because I is a giant, you think I is a man-gobbling cannibal?" he shouted. "You is about right. Giants is all cannibal and murderful, and they does gobble up human beings. We is a giant country now. Giants is everywhere around. Out there is us, the famous bone-crunching giant. Bone-crunching giant crunches up 2 whoopsie-whiffling human beings for supper every night. Noise is ear-busting. Noise of crunching bones goes crackety-crack for miles around." "Ouch," Sophie said. "Bone-crunching giant only gobbles human beings from turkey," the giant said. "Every night, bone-crunching galloping off to Turkey to gobble Turks." That's the giant talking, so that's my giant talking voice. Sophie's sense of patriotism was suddenly so bruised by this remark that she became quite angry. "Why Turks?" she blurted out. "What's wrong with the English?" "Bone-crunching giant says Turks is tasting ever so much juicier and so scrumdiddly-umptious. Bone-crunchier says Turkish human beings has a glamoury flavor. He says Turks from Turkey is tasting of Turkey." "I suppose they would work," Sophie said. "Of course they would," the giant shouted. "Every human being is diddly and different. Some is scrumdiddly-umptious, and some is uckly slush. Greeks is all full of uckly slush. No giant is eating Greeks, ever." "Why not?" Sophie asked. "Greeks from Greece is all tasting greasy," the giant said. "I imagine that's possible too," Sophie said. She was wondering with a bit of a tremble what all this talking about eating people was leading up to. Whatever happened, she simply must play along with this peculiar giant and smile at his jokes. But were they jokes? Perhaps the great brute was just working up an appetite by talking about food. "As I'm saying," the giant went on, "all human beings is having different flavors. Human being from Panama is tasting very strong of hats." "Why hats?" Sophie said. "You is not clever," the giant said, moving his great ears in and out. "I thought all human beings is full of brains, but your head is empty like a bunduggle." "Do you like vegetables?" Sophie asked, hoping to steer the conversation towards a slightly less dangerous kind of food. "You is trying to change subject," the giant said sternly. "We is having an interesting babblement about the taste of human being. The human being is not a vegetable. Oh, but the bean is a vegetable, Sophie said. Not the human being, the giant said. The human being has 2 legs and a vegetable has no legs. Sophie didn't want to argue anymore. The last thing she wanted to do was to make the giant cross. The human being, the giant went on, is coming in on a dillions of different flavors. For instance, human beings from Wales is tasting very whooshy of fish. There's something very fishy about Wales. You mean Wales? Sophie said. Wales is different than Wales. Wales is Wales, the giant said. Don't gobble funk around with the words. I will now give you another example. Human beings from Jersey has a disgusting woolly tickle on the tongue, the giant said. Human beings from Jersey is tasting of cardigans. You mean jerseys? Sophie said. You are once again gobble funking. The giant shouted. Don't do it. This is a serious and stitching subject. May I continue? Please do, Sophie said. Dance from Denmark is tasting ever so much of dogs, the giant went on. Of course, Sophie said. They taste of Great Danes. Wrong, cried the giant, slapping his thigh. Danes from Denmark is tasting doggy, because they is tasting of Labradors. Then what do the people of Labrador taste of? Sophie asked. Danes, the giant cried triumphantly. Great Danes. Aren't you getting a bit mixed up? Sophie said. I is a very mixed up giant, the giant said, but I does do my best, and I is not nearly as mixed up as the other giants. I know one who gallops all the way to Wellington for his supper. Wellington, Sophie said. Where is Wellington? Your head is full of squish flies, the giant said. Wellington is in New Zealand. The human beings is Wellington has an especially scrumdiddlyumptious taste, so says the welly-eating giant. What do the people of Wellington taste of? Sophie asked. Boots, the giant said. Of course, Sophie said. I should have known. Sophie decided that this conversation had now gone on long enough. If she was going to be eaten, she'd rather get it over and done with right away than be kept hanging around anymore. What sort of human beings do you eat? She asked, trembling. Me? Shouted the giant, his mighty voice making the glass rattle on their shelves. Me gobbling up human beings? This I never. The others, yes. All the others is gobbling them up every night, but not me. I is a freaky giant. I is a nice jumbly giant. I is the only nice and jumbly giant in the giant country. I is the big friendly giant. I is the BFG. What is your name? My name is Sophie, Sophie said, hardly daring to believe the good news she had just heard. Oops. So, as I read that chapter today, you noticed a lot of very weird words and a very weird conversation. You noticed that the BFG does not speak very good English, and he's very hard to read. He says I is a lot. So remember our question? How does the BFG describe himself? How is he describing how he is compared to the other giants? How does he describe his personality a little bit? What is he like? Answer the question. I will see you guys again tomorrow. Have a great day. Miss you guys. Be safe out there. Do your work. Have fun. Go run around. Do kid stuff. Have a great day.